wasn't invited to my family's retreat for 10 years. Then I bought the beach house they tried to erase me from. The email sat in my inbox. Its subject line, a clean, sharp paper cut. Whitmore Family Retreat 2025. RSVP by Friday. I clicked on it. I always did. It was a morbid habit, like picking at a scab to see if it still hurt. It always did. My eyes scanned the body of the email. A cheerful, exclamation point-filled message from my sister Camille. It detailed the itinerary, the planned dinners, the bonfire on the beach. Below that was the list of names, a roll call of everyone who mattered. My mother, Catherine. My sister, Camille. Aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in years. Even Mark, my cousin's new boyfriend, a man I'd never met, had his name neatly typed out. But my name wasn't there. I scrolled down again, slowly this time, just to be sure. It was a fool's hope. My name was absent. Not this year. Not last year. Not for the last 10. 10 years of being a ghost in my own family. My name is Ava, and I'm 34 years old. The feeling of being erased doesn't scream. It's not a sudden shock. It's a low, constant hum in the back of your mind. A quiet ringing that you get so used to you forget it's there. Until an email like this comes along and turns the volume all the way up. Until the silence it leaves behind is the only thing you can hear. It's a quiet that can break you, if you let it. But before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, and drop a comment to let me know where you are watching from. To understand my place in the Whitmore family, or rather, my lack of one, you'd have to understand the ecosystem we grew up in. It wasn't a family so much as a solar system, and my sister Camille was the sun. She was blindingly bright, effortlessly charming, and everything and everyone orbited her. Her laughter was the loudest sound in any room, a magnetic force that pulled people in. She was the one who was photogenic, whose school pictures took up prime real estate on the mantelpiece, whose every minor achievement was celebrated with the kind of fanfare usually reserved for national holidays. And I was Pluto, the distant, cold, forgotten rock at the edge of it all. I wasn't unloved, not in the active, cruel sense of the word. I was simply unthought of. My existence was a quiet fact, like the old armchair in the corner of the living room, part of the furniture, but rarely noticed. I was the bookish one, the quiet one, the one who could entertain herself for hours and therefore required no energy, no attention. In a family that ran on the high-octane fuel of Camille's constant need for an audience, my self-sufficiency was not seen as a strength, but as a reason to be overlooked. The small hurts started early, accumulating like a fine layer of dust over everything. I remember the year I won the statewide science fair. I was in 8th grade, a hopelessly nerdy kid with braces and a passion for marine biology. My project was a detailed study of tidal pool ecosystems. I'd spent months on it, working late in the school library, carefully drawing diagrams and compiling data. Winning was the single greatest achievement of my young life. I remember the bus ride home from the state capitol, the heavy gold-plated trophy sitting on my lap, the blue ribbon pinned crookedly to my jacket. My heart felt like it was going to beat right out of my chest. I couldn't wait to show my family. I walked into the house. My mom was on the phone in the kitchen, laughing about something with one of her friends. I stood there, holding the trophy, waiting for her to notice me. After a minute, she glanced over, her eyes flicking to the trophy and then back to the phone. She gave me a little finger wiggle and mouthed the words, "Just a second, honey." I waited and waited. I stood in the doorway for what felt like an eternity, the trophy getting heavier in my arms, the shine of my victory slowly dulling under the fluorescent kitchen lights. When she finally hung up, she was already distracted. "Oh, hi, sweetie," she said, opening the refrigerator. "What's for dinner tonight?" I was thinking maybe pasta. "I won, Mom," I said quietly, holding up the trophy. "First place. In the whole state. Oh, that's wonderful, dear. Really, that's so smart of you." She patted my arm, her eyes scanning the contents of the fridge. "That's my smart girl. Can you do me a favor and chop up an onion?" The trophy was never mentioned again. It sat on my desk in my room, a monument to an achievement no one else in the house cared about. A week later, Camille came home from a school track meet. She had run in a relay race, and her team had come in 6th place out of 8. She hadn't even run well. She'd complained that her ankle hurt. That evening, my dad took her out for ice cream to celebrate her athletic spirit. The flimsy green participation ribbon she got was put into a shadow box and hung in the hallway, part of the ever-expanding shrine to Camille's life. My state championship trophy was eventually used as a bookend. This pattern repeated itself in countless ways. The most painful was the slow, digital, and physical cropping of me from our family's history. It started with a vacation to the Grand Canyon when I was 10. We took a family photo at a scenic overlook. I remember the photographer, a tourist my dad had flagged down, telling us to squeeze in tighter. But Camille was in the center, flanked by my parents, and I was on the very end, slightly awkward and half in shadow. It was the only group photo we took on the whole trip. Years later, for my parents' anniversary, Camille had the photo professionally blown up and framed. When I saw it hanging in their living room, my breath caught in my throat. I was gone. The photo ended at my father's shoulder. To make the composition more balanced, as Camille later explained when I quietly asked, she had simply cropped me out. It wasn't malicious. It was aesthetic. I was inconvenient to the perfect picture. The erasure was complete on my 14th birthday. The entire family was in a frenzy of preparation for Camille's surprise Sweet 16, a massive affair that was still over a month away. My birthday, falling in the middle of this party planning storm, was simply a casualty. I woke up that morning with a knot of quiet hope in my stomach. 14 felt like a big deal. I came downstairs expecting maybe a small pile of presents on the dining table, or at least a happy birthday hug. The house was empty. There was a note on the fridge from my mom. "Ava, make your own breakfast. Taking Cam shopping for party dresses. Back after 3. I remember the silence of the house that day. I ate a bowl of cereal, staring at the wall. I read a book. I went for a walk. I felt like a ghost in my own home. When my mother and sister finally returned late that afternoon, their arms laden with shopping bags, they were laughing and flushed with excitement. It was only when my mom saw the look on my face that a slow dawning horror crept into her eyes. "Oh, Ava," she gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God, honey, your birthday. With all of this." She gestured helplessly at the bags. Camille, ever the performer, rushed to hug me. "Oh, Ava, I feel like the worst sister in the world. Don't worry, we'll celebrate you right now. We'll order a huge pizza, your favorite, and we can watch that movie you like." And we did. We ate pizza on paper plates, and they sang a belated, slightly off-key version of Happy Birthday. They tried to make it right, but it was too late. The day had already happened. The message had been sent. My day was not important enough to be remembered on its own. It was an afterthought, a problem to be fixed. I smiled and said it was okay, because that was my role. I swallowed my hurt and made them feel better about forgetting me. Through all of this, my father was my quiet ally. He was a traveling salesman, gone more than he was home, a quiet, thoughtful man who seemed as out of place in our loud family as I did. He didn't fight my battles for me, but he saw me. He would find me in my room, reading or sketching, and just sit on the edge of my bed, a silent, comforting presence. He was the one who noticed my new haircut, who asked about the book I was reading, who saw the science fair trophy on my desk and said, "That's a hell of an achievement." Ava Bean. The memory I hold on to the tightest is from a summer at the beach house, the one place he seemed truly happy. I was about 12, feeling particularly invisible after being ignored out of a game of volleyball by Camille and our cousins. I had walked away from their laughter and down to the water's edge, the sting of tears in my eyes. My dad followed me. We walked in silence for a long time, the waves washing over our ankles, the salty air cool on our faces. He stopped and bent down, picking something out of the wet sand. He pressed it into my palm. It was a small turquoise seashell, worn perfectly smooth and whole by the relentless churn of the ocean. "You know," he said, his voice a low rumble like the distant tide, "the ocean doesn't fight the rocks. It doesn't smash itself against them in a fit of anger. It just moves around them, over them, for years and years and years, until the ocean is what changes the shape of the coastline." He looked down at me, his gaze serious and kind. "Think in tides, Ava. Don't let them make you small. The tide always comes back in." I closed my hand around the shell, its coolness a balm to my hurt. I didn't fully understand the depth of his words then, but I knew they were a gift, a secret map for navigating my own family. That shell became my talisman, a tangible piece of the knowledge that at least one person saw me completely. I kept it, and I held on to his words, even as the family slowly, carelessly, and completely erased me. After staring at the retreat email, the list of names a stark testament to my non-existence, I finally closed my laptop. The familiar hum of being forgotten was louder than ever, a shrill ringing in my ears. I walked to the small wooden box on my dresser where I kept my most precious things and took out the turquoise seashell. I rolled its smooth, cool surface between my thumb and forefinger, the memory of my father's voice a faint echo in my mind. "Don't let them make you small." A strange impulse took over me, a feeling I couldn't quite name. It wasn't just grief or anger. It was a desperate need to connect with the one place on earth where my father's memory felt tangible, where I had once felt seen. The beach house. I sat back down at my desk, opened my laptop, and bypassed my email. I opened a new browser tab and, with a sense of morbid curiosity, typed the address of the house into a real estate search engine. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe just some pictures, a dose of painful nostalgia. Maybe I wanted to hurt myself a little more, to confirm how much they had changed it, how much of him they had scrubbed away. The search results populated the screen. My eyes scanned past the map, the property value estimates, and then they stopped. My breath caught in my chest. It wasn't a historical listing. It was an active one. A bright red banner blazed in the corner of the main photo. The two words, a punch to the gut: for sale, for sale. The words didn't compute at first. They were selling it. They were selling my father's house, the place he had called his soul's anchor, the place he had spent every summer of his life. They were getting rid of it, and no one had bothered to tell me. Not a phone call, not a text message, not a single word. Just a silent, unanimous decision made by a family that had long ago decided I was no longer a voting member. My hand trembled as I clicked on the listing. The photos were bleak. The house looked tired, unloved. The cheerful blue shutters were faded, the paint on the deck peeling away in sad gray strips. Inside, the furniture was the same, but it was draped in a thin layer of dust. The vibrant life that had once filled those rooms was gone, replaced by a stale, empty stillness. I zoomed in on a photo of the front porch. The hook where the seashell wind chime I'd made with Dad used to hang was empty. They had taken it down. They had let his memory go, piece by piece. Numbly, I scrolled down the page, past the room dimensions and property features, until my eyes landed on the agent's remarks. A single sentence sent a jolt of cold fury through me. Property sold as is. Buyer to assume responsibility for lapsed property tax and insurance payments. They hadn't just decided to sell it, they had neglected it to the point of default. They had stopped paying the bills, let the insurance lapse, let it fall into a state of disrepair. They were treating my father's legacy like a piece of junk they were casting off, too lazy to even take it to the dump themselves. It wasn't just erasure anymore. It was desecration. I was about to slam my laptop shut, to let the wave of pain and rage wash over me, when I saw a small hyperlink at the bottom of the page, View Public Records. On autopilot, my finger clicked it. I was taken to the county assessor's website, a dry, bureaucratic portal of deeds and tax records. I don't know what I was looking for, but I kept digging, pulling up the original deed with my father's name, and then a document I had never seen before, the Whitmore Family Trust. It was dozens of pages of dense legal jargon, a language I didn't speak, but I forced myself to read it, my eyes scanning for keywords: beach house, property, inheritance. And that's when I found it. Buried deep in a section about the duties of the trustees, there was a clause. It was a complex little paragraph, but its meaning, once I deciphered it, was devastatingly clear. It stated that in the event the primary trustees, named as my mother, Catherine Whitmore, and my sister, Camille Whitmore, failed to maintain the property and its associated financial obligations for a period longer than 12 consecutive months, a secondary provision would be triggered, a backdoor, a safeguard. The provision stated that full control and ownership of the property, along with all its liabilities, would be offered exclusively and irrevocably to a designated third party. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. A wild, impossible hope flickered to life in my chest. I read the next line, my world tilting on its axis. Designated third party, Ava Marie Whitmore. I read my own name 3 times. It felt like a voice from the grave, a final protective gesture from the one person who had always seen the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. He had known they would be careless with his memory, and he had left me a key. Not a spare key to the front door they could change, but an unbreakable key to the whole damn house. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely dial my phone. I called my best friend Savannah, a paralegal whose mind was as sharp as a razor. "Sav, you're not going to believe this," I said, my voice cracking with a mix of shock and something that felt dangerously like triumph. I explained everything, the email, the listing, the neglect, the clause with my name on it. She listened patiently, without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. I could hear the faint, rapid clicking of her keyboard in the background. "Send me the links, Ava," she said, her voice calm and steady as a rock. "All of them. The listing, the public records, everything. Let me look." I sent them. The minutes stretched into an hour. I paced my small apartment, from the window to the kitchen and back again, the turquoise shell clutched in my hand. It was the longest hour of my life. Finally, my phone rang. "Ava," Savannah said, and there was a note of genuine awe in her voice. Your dad was a brilliant man. A goddamn legal poet? Is it real? I whispered, afraid to even breathe. It's as real as it gets. It's ironclad. The trust was breached the moment they let the insurance lapse 13 months ago. They defaulted on the clause, and it triggered the transfer of rights to you. It's all here in black and white. I sank onto my sofa, my legs suddenly weak. So what does it mean? What do I do? I could hear the smile in her voice, a fierce, protective grin. It means that if you can cover the back taxes and the legal fees to settle the deed transfer, the house is yours. No arguments, no probate, no court battle. It's a clean, simple execution of the trust's own terms. She paused, her voice growing serious. So the only question is, Ava, do you want it? I looked out my window at the sprawling, indifferent city skyline, a world away from the ocean and the house that held the last vestiges of my father. I thought of 10 years of smiling family photos I wasn't in. I thought of my state championship trophy used as a bookend. I thought of the empty hook where our wind chime used to hang. And I thought of my father's voice, a low rumble like the distant tide. Don't let them make you small. This was it. The tide was coming back in. Yes, I said, and my voice didn't shake. It was as solid and certain as the ground beneath my feet. Yes, I want it. My decision to claim the house wasn't just about a forgotten birthday or a cropped photograph. It was forged in the crucible of real crisis, in the sterile, beeping environment of a hospital room where the true nature of my family was laid bare. The defining moment, the wound that never truly healed, was my father's stroke. The call came on a Tuesday morning. I was in a meeting at work, presenting a quarterly data analysis to my team. My phone, set to vibrate, buzzed insistently against the polished conference table. I ignored it. It buzzed again and again. A cold knot of dread tightened in my stomach. I excused myself, stepping into the hallway and answering the call. It was my mother, her voice thin and reedy with a panic I had never heard before. "It's your father," she said, her words tumbling over each other. He collapsed. An ambulance came. "We're at St. Mary's Hospital." "It's bad, Ava. It's really bad." The world narrowed to a single point. My carefully constructed life of spreadsheets and projections dissolved. I walked back into the conference room, my face pale, and simply said, "I have to go." "It's a family emergency." I didn't wait for a response. I grabbed my purse and walked out, leaving my laptop open, my presentation frozen mid-sentence on the screen. I lived 3 states away. The next 2 hours were a blur of frantic action. I threw clothes into a suitcase, booked a one-way flight on my phone while searching for a cab, and raced to the airport. The entire time, my mind was a maelstrom of fear. I tried calling my mother and Camille for an update, but my calls went straight to voicemail. I was flying blind into the worst moment of my life. When I finally arrived at the hospital, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and unspoken grief, I found my mother in the ICU waiting room. She was sitting under a flickering fluorescent light, twisting a tissue in her hands. She looked small and lost. "Mom," I said, rushing to her side. "What's happening? Is he okay?" She looked up, her eyes glassy. It was a massive stroke. "The doctors? They don't know." I scanned the empty waiting room. "Where's Camille?" My mother let out a long, weary sigh, a sound I knew well. It was the sigh she reserved for explaining Camille's behavior. "Oh, you know Camille. She was here, but she was just too overwhelmed. She gets so emotional. Seeing him like that with all the tubes, she just couldn't handle it. She went home to rest and to coordinate, phone calls to the family. Coordinating. While our father's life hung in the balance, Camille was at home, managing the narrative. I felt a flash of white-hot anger, but I pushed it down. It wouldn't help him. I walked past my mother, through the double doors, and into the ICU. The sight of him shattered me. My father, always so vital and strong, was reduced to a still, frail figure in a hospital bed. He was tethered to a web of tubes and wires, his face slack, the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor the only sign of the fight he was putting up. A nurse explained that the stroke had severely affected his right side and his ability to speak. He was trapped inside his own body. I pulled up the hard plastic visitor's chair, my legs shaking, and took his left hand. It was cool and limp in mine. "Hi, Dad," I whispered, my throat tight with unshed tears. "It's Ava. I'm here. I'm right here." His eyelids, which had been closed, fluttered weakly. They opened, clouded with confusion and fear, but as they focused on my face, I saw a flicker of recognition, of relief. He squeezed my hand, a faint but definite pressure. It was all I needed. I did not leave that chair for 2 weeks. I learned the nurses' names and schedules. I learned to read the flickering green lines on the monitors. I learned the difference between the beep of a routine check and the alarm that brought nurses running. I talked to him for hours, telling him about my job, my apartment, reading him articles from the newspaper, anything to fill the terrifying silence. I slept in that uncomfortable chair, my neck stiff, my body aching, waking with a jolt every time a machine beeped differently. Camille visited twice. Her visits were brief, performative cameos. She would stand in the doorway, her designer purse slung over her shoulder, her phone in her hand. "Oh, Daddy," she would sigh dramatically, her eyes welling with convenient tears. "This is just too awful. I can't bear to see you like this." She would talk about how stressful this all was for her, how she had to update all the relatives on the family group chat, how the thought of it all was giving her migraines. She took a picture of his hand holding hers and posted it on social media with the caption, "Fighting with my brave dad. So hard to be strong." Then she would leave, the scent of her expensive perfume lingering in the sterile air long after she was gone. She never stayed for more than 30 minutes. She never offered to sit with him so I could get a real meal or a few hours of sleep. My mother floated in and out, her visits filled with a nervous, distracting energy. She brought me bad coffee in styrofoam cups and relayed messages from worried relatives, most of whom, I noted, had been calling Camille, not her. She looked at me, camped out in the corner with my book and my vigil, with a sort of detached pity, as if I were a well-meaning but slightly odd stranger. She never said, "Thank you for coming." She never said, "I'm so glad you're here." The doctors said that hearing a familiar voice was crucial for his recovery, so I read to him. I had thrown a worn paperback of Steinbeck's Travels with Charlie, one of his favorites, into my suitcase. I read for hours, my voice growing hoarse. The rhythmic cadence of the words, a mantra against the beeping machines. One afternoon, about a week into my stay, I was reading a chapter about the redwood forests. His breathing was even, and I thought he was asleep. I paused to take a sip of water. In the sudden quiet, I heard a sound, a rough, guttural whisper. I leaned closer to the bed, my heart stopping. He was looking at me, his eyes clear for the first time in days. He was working his mouth, the effort immense, his brow furrowed. "You," he rasped, his voice a cracked, fragile thing I could barely hear. He took a shaky breath. "You came?" The two words broke through the dam of exhaustion and fear I had built inside me. Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent. I squeezed his hand, bringing it to my cheek. "Of course I came, Dad," I sobbed quietly. Of course I came. It was everything. It was validation. It was the quiet acknowledgement that he saw me, that he knew who was truly there in the darkest hour. After he was moved from the ICU, the talk turned to long-term care, rehabilitation, and finances. I knew my dad was meticulous and had everything in order, but I wanted to understand. I found my mother in the hospital cafeteria, stirring a cup of tea. "Mom," I started gently, sitting down opposite her. "I was thinking we should probably find Dad's paperwork. The will, the trust documents for the house, just to make sure we understand everything." She waved a dismissive hand, not even looking up at me. "Oh, Ava, don't worry your pretty little head about all that. It's all very complicated. Camille and I have it handled. Don't worry your pretty little head." The words were so casually patronizing, so utterly dismissive of my intelligence, my competence, my role as his daughter. I was a 30-year-old woman with a demanding career, and she was speaking to me like I was a child who couldn't be trusted with adult matters. I'm capable of understanding it. "Mom," I said, my voice tight with restraint. "He's my father too. I just think it's important that we all—" "It's handled," she cut me off, her tone sharp and final. "Camille has the name of a very good lawyer. We're meeting with him next week. You have to get back to your job, don't you? We'll be fine." The message was brutally clear. Your help is not needed. Your input is not wanted. You are not part of this decision-making unit. Go back to your little life 3 states away and leave the important things to us. I flew home a few days later, once he was stable. The ache in my chest was a physical weight. My father recovered slowly, but he was never the same man. The last time I set foot in the beach house was a few months after his stroke. I had flown in to visit him and drove out to the coast for the day, desperate to feel that connection to him. I still had my old spare key, the one he'd given me when I was 16. I let myself in. The house was quiet and musty. In a closet, I found the seashell wind chime we'd made, tangled and broken. I spent an hour on the deck, patiently untangling it before hanging it back on its hook by the door. The next time I came to visit, about a year later, I drove out again. I walked up the familiar steps, put my key in the lock, and turned. Nothing. It didn't budge. I tried again. It was useless. They had changed the locks. They had changed the locks and hadn't bothered to tell me, hadn't thought to give me a new key. I stood on the porch, my old key useless in my hand, another door quietly and firmly closed to me. It was on that porch that I finally accepted the truth. It wasn't that they forgot me. They were actively, if quietly, keeping me out. That was the sacrifice and the erasure. I was the one who came, and I was the one who was locked out. The decision to claim the house was not made in a flash of anger. It crystallized over a long, quiet evening in my apartment, an evening spent with the ghosts of the past and the stark reality of my financial present. After my call with Savannah, a profound sense of calm had settled over me. For the first time, I had a path forward that wasn't simply retreating into silence. I had a legal right, a key my father had left me, and now I had to decide if I had the courage to use it. For years, my life had been a fortress of self-sufficiency. My career as a data analyst was a perfect fit for my personality. I found comfort in logic, in patterns, in finding objective truth within a sea of chaotic information. My finances were an extension of that mindset. I wasn't wealthy by any means, but I was secure. I had built that security myself, brick by careful brick. That evening, I pulled out every financial statement I had, my savings account, my retirement fund, my modest investment portfolio. I spread them across my dining table like a hand of cards. Each statement represented years of quiet discipline, the fancy dinners I'd skipped, the extravagant vacations I hadn't taken, the newer car I hadn't bought. While Camille's life was a curated feed of luxury, ski trips to Aspen, designer bags, a new convertible every few years, all subsidized by my parents, my life was a spreadsheet. It was a testament to the thousands of small, responsible choices I had made, building a foundation they couldn't see and would never understand. I created a new spreadsheet, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I entered the numbers Savannah had given me, the staggering amount of back taxes, the lapsed insurance premiums that needed to be paid in full, the estimated legal fees, closing costs, and transfer taxes. The total was daunting. It would consume more than half of my liquid savings, the safety net I had so painstakingly woven for myself. It was a huge financial risk. The house was old, neglected. It would need repairs. It was a money pit, an emotional liability. Was it worth it? Was a house filled with so many painful memories worth jeopardizing the stable, peaceful life I had built for myself, far away from their drama? I closed my eyes and the answer came not in numbers, but in images. I saw my father's face in the hospital, his eyes clear for a single moment, his voice a broken whisper. You came. I saw the seashell wind chime, tangled and discarded in a dusty closet. I saw the empty space in the family portrait where I was supposed to be. I saw the useless key in my hand as I stood on the porch of the house they had locked me out of. This wasn't a financial transaction. It was an act of reclamation. It wasn't about a building of wood and nails. It was about memory and justice, and a piece of my father they were trying to throw away like garbage. It was about my own story, the one they had been slowly erasing page by page. This was my chance to seize the pen and write myself back in. The risk was no longer financial. The real risk was in doing nothing, in letting them have the final word, in letting the hum of my own erasure be the soundtrack to the rest of my life. I'm doing it, I said out loud to the empty room, the decision settling in my bones with a solid, unshakable certainty. The next 2 weeks were a blur of focused, clandestine activity. Savannah was my general, my strategist. We operated like a secret intelligence unit. There were hushed phone calls late at night, a flurry of encrypted emails filled with legal documents. I spent my lunch breaks at the bank arranging wire transfers. I signed papers with a digital signature, my hand steady. Because of the precise, powerful language my father had embedded in the trust, the process was surprisingly clean, a simple execution of a failed contract. My mother and Camille, as the defaulted trustees, had no legal right to be notified of the transfer until after it was complete. We were moving in the shadows, and with every step, I felt a growing sense of power, a feeling so foreign it was almost dizzying. The deed was finalized on a Tuesday morning. I was at my desk at work, trying to focus on a complex data set, when a text from Savannah came through. It was a picture of the final signed document from the county clerk's office. A red stamp was blazoned across the bottom, and there on the line for the new owner was my name in clear black ink, Ava Marie Whitmore. A wave of something, relief, terror, triumph, washed over me. I had to grip my desk to steady myself. I excused myself and walked to the restroom, locking myself in a stall. I stared at my reflection in the polished steel of the door. The same face, the same quiet woman, but everything was different. I was no longer the forgotten daughter. I was a homeowner. I was the owner of my own past, I took a deep breath, walked back to my desk, and opened my calendar. The Whitmore family retreat was scheduled to begin that Friday, 3 days away. For years, they had stayed at the luxurious oceanfront resort next door to the beach house, preferring its catered meals and swimming pool to the rustic, sandy reality of the house itself. The house was just a prop for them now, a backdrop for a nostalgic photo op. I picked up my phone and dialed the hotel's number. Good afternoon. Oceanfront Resort, this is Brenda speaking. Hello? Brenda? I said, my voice even and cool. I'd like to make a reservation for this coming weekend. I understand you have a master suite with an oceanfront balcony. Let me check for you. Yes, it looks like it's available. It's our last one. And for what name, please? I paused, savoring the moment. The name is Whitmore, I said. Miss A. Whitmore. I arrived on Friday afternoon, hours before the rest of them were due to arrive. I checked into the sprawling master suite. The balcony had a perfect panoramic view of the beach. And there, standing weathered and proud against the dunes, was the beach house. My house, I didn't go to it yet. I ordered a glass of iced tea from room service and sat on the balcony, a quiet sentinel. I waited. The sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The tide was coming in. Around 5 o'clock I saw them. 2 large SUVs packed with luggage and people pulled into the hotel's circular driveway. My mother got out of one, Camille out of the other, already directing the valet with loud, sweeping gestures. Aunts, uncles, cousins, the whole clan. They looked happy, excited, completely oblivious. They were walking into a story that was no longer theirs. I finished my tea, stood up, and brushed the imaginary wrinkles from my dress. I took the elevator down to the lobby. I found a spot behind a large marble pillar, a silent observer. They were all gathered near the check-in desk, a chaotic, chattering group. Camille, of course, was at the front, tapping her immaculate nails impatiently on the marble countertop. Hi, she said to the young man behind the desk, her voice dripping with the casual condescension she reserved for service staff. We have a block of rooms reserved for the Whitmore family retreat. The clerk, whose name tag read Kevin, typed something into his computer. He frowned. He typed again. Whitmore, you said? Yes, Camille said, her voice sharpening with annoyance. We do this every year. It's a standing reservation. I'm sorry, ma'am, Kevin said, looking genuinely confused. I don't see a block of rooms under that name. I do have one reservation for a Miss Ava Whitmore's party in the master suite, but that's the only Whitmore I have for this weekend. The chattering behind Camille died down instantly. The entire lobby seemed to go silent, the ambient music suddenly loud and intrusive. Camille froze. Her practiced smile faltered. Ava? No, that can't be right. My sister? There must be a mistake. My mother, sensing the shift in energy, pushed her way to the front. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with confusion and a dawning horror. Ava Whitmore? My daughter? What are you talking about? That was my cue. I stepped out from behind the pillar. I walked calmly and deliberately towards the desk, my low heels clicking softly on the polished floor. Every single head turned to watch me. It was the first time in 10 years I had been in the same room with all of them. Their collective shock was a physical wave that washed over me. There's no mistake, I said, my voice quiet but carrying easily in the silent lobby. I smiled politely at the stunned clerk. I'm Miss Whitmore. Camille stared at me as if I were an apparition. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. My mother found her voice, a thin, reedy whisper. Ava, what are you doing here? What is this? She stammered. But the retreat, our rooms. I held her gaze, my own steady and unflinching. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking away. I wasn't shrinking. You should have called ahead, I said simply. The hotel is fully booked. I took the last suite. I let my eyes drift past them, to the large glass doors of the lobby, through which the old beach house was perfectly framed against the twilight sky. But it doesn't really matter, does it? The family isn't staying at the house anymore anyway. I paused, letting the words hang in the air, a quiet, simple statement of fact. What are you talking about? Camille finally snapped, her confusion curdling into anger. What is this, Ava? Some kind of sick, twisted joke? I turned my full attention to my sister, looking her directly in the eye. No joke, Camille. I took a slow, deliberate breath. I bought the house. The deed finalized 2 weeks ago. The silence that followed my announcement was not just a lack of sound. It was a physical presence, a heavy, suffocating blanket that fell over the entire hotel lobby. The cheerful bell of a distant elevator, the soft clinking of glasses from the bar, all of it was swallowed by the profound, disbelieving stillness that radiated from our small group. My family stood frozen, a tableau of suspended animation. The laughing, chattering group that had breezed in moments ago was gone, replaced by a collection of stunned strangers who all happened to share my DNA. Camille's face, usually a mask of confident beauty, had gone completely slack. Her perfectly applied lipstick seemed garish against the sudden pallor of her skin. Her mouth was slightly agape, as if the words "I bought the house" were a foreign language she was struggling to translate. My mother was the first to react. She took a half-step forward, her hand fluttering at her throat like a trapped bird. "You bought it?" she whispered, her voice thin and incredulous. It wasn't a question of fact, but of comprehension, as if she was asking me to explain how the laws of physics had suddenly been suspended. "Why, Ava? Why would you do such a thing?" The question, so laced with bewildered accusation, was the final piece I needed. For my entire life, they had acted without considering me. They had cropped the photo, forgotten the birthday, changed the lock, neglected the house, and tried to sell it, all without a single thought for me. And now, the first time I had acted on my own, for myself, her immediate response was to demand a justification. I let my eyes travel over all their faces, one by one. I saw my Uncle Robert, his jovial face now slack with confusion. I saw my Aunt Carol, her hand gripping his arm, her eyes wide. I saw my cousins, people I had once built sandcastles with, now staring at me as if I were a complete stranger who had just crashed their party. And I realized, with a sudden, searing clarity, that I was a stranger to them. They had no idea who I had become in the decade they had rendered me invisible. I finally brought my gaze back to my mother, and then to Camille. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to shout. The quietest truths are often the most devastating. "Because I was never invited," I said, my voice soft but carrying easily in the silent room, each word clear and deliberate. But I was never gone. The simplicity of the statement seemed to stun them more than any angry outburst ever could have. It was the unvarnished truth of my life, the central conflict of my existence, laid bare on the marble floor of a hotel lobby. It didn't accuse. It merely stated a fact, and it was irrefutable. I saw a flicker of something in my mother's eyes, not understanding perhaps, but the first dawning glimmer of consequence. Camille, however, recovered faster. Her shock was rapidly being replaced by the familiar armor of her anger. "That's ridiculous," she snapped, her voice regaining its sharp, commanding edge. "You can't just buy the house. It's the family's house. We were going to sell it." "You were going to let it fall apart and then sell it," I corrected her gently. "The trust your father set up had provisions for that. I just followed the rules. You went behind our backs," she accused, her voice rising. A few other hotel guests were starting to stare. "There was no behind to go to," I said, my voice still calm. "You built a wall, Camille." I just stopped knocking. I had said my piece. The battle was won before it had even begun. There was nothing more to be gained by standing there, debating the past with people who refused to see it. It was time to leave them with the consequences of their own actions. I turned to the young clerk, Kevin, who looked like he wished the floor would swallow him whole. He was staring at our family drama, his eyes wide like a frightened deer. I gave him a small, reassuring smile, an attempt to bring him back to the world of normal hotel operations. "Kevin," I said, my voice dropping to a calm, professional tone. "As I was saying, these are my family members. They seem to have had some travel mix-ups and have arrived without a reservation." I let my eyes sweep over the stunned faces of my relatives, now looking less like a powerful clan and more like a group of lost tourists. "They are not on my guest list, so they won't be staying in my suite." I saw a flicker of indignation on my Uncle Robert's face, a sputtering protest forming on my Aunt Carol's lips. Before anyone could launch into a new argument, before Camille could unleash the torrent of fury I could see building in her eyes, I added one last thing. "Please," I said to Kevin, my voice softening just a little as I looked at my mother's pale, stricken face. "Escort anyone not on my list from the premises. But there's no need to be harsh. Their family, after all." The finality of the statement, the quiet, dismissive authority of it, seemed to suck the remaining air out of the room. It was an act of mercy and a final, devastating assertion of my new position. I was no longer the one being excluded. I was the one setting the terms. With that, I turned my back on them. I walked toward the bank of elevators, my back straight, my footsteps echoing faintly on the marble floor. I did not run. I did not look back. I could feel their collective stare, a burning heat on my skin. It was the most attention they had paid me in my entire life, and it was happening because I was walking away. I pressed the call button and waited, my face a neutral mask. The elevator arrived with a cheerful ping. The doors slid open. I stepped inside the mirrored box, turned around and looked out at them one last time. They hadn't moved. They were a tableau of confusion and shock, a group of people whose carefully planned world had just been shattered. They looked stiff-shouldered, lost, and suddenly very small. The silence that trailed behind them was no longer my burden to carry. It was theirs. The elevator doors slid shut, encasing me in a quiet, reflective silence. And as the car began to ascend, I finally allowed myself to exhale. A long, shuddering breath I felt like I had been holding for 10 years. I leaned my head against the cool metal wall, and for the first time, I didn't feel the hum of being erased. I just felt the quiet hum of the elevator, lifting me up and away. I expected an explosion. I spent that first night in the master suite in a state of high alert, my phone clutched in my hand, waiting for the inevitable barrage of angry calls and furious text messages. I imagined Camille hammering on my door, demanding a confrontation. I imagined my mother calling, weeping and begging me to undo what I had done. But what I got, for the rest of Friday night and all of Saturday morning, was a deep, unsettling silence. It was the silence of a stunned army regrouping after a devastatingly successful ambush. I knew my sister. Camille was a creature of action and narrative. She could not stand to be silent, and she could not, under any circumstances, stand to lose control of the story. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. She was reloading. The counterattack came not as a frontal assault, but as a public execution. On Saturday afternoon, I was sitting on the balcony of my suite, looking out at the ocean, a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands. My phone buzzed with a text from Savannah. It wasn't a message, just a link to a local news website. My heart sank before I even clicked it. The headline was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. Local family's heartbreak. Estranged daughter exploits legal loophole. Ousts family from generational retreat house. Beneath the headline was a large, professionally shot photo of Camille, her face a perfect mask of tragic beauty, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. Her arm was wrapped around my mother, who was looking down, her expression one of frail, helpless sorrow. They looked like victims of a natural disaster. The article itself was a work of fiction, skillfully woven with just enough truth to be believable. It painted me as a cold, calculating viper who had been estranged from the family for years, by her own choice. Camille was quoted extensively, her words dripping with a false, saccharine sorrow that made my stomach turn. "We're just devastated," she said, her voice in the accompanying video clip thick with crocodile tears. "We don't know why Ava would do this. We've always loved her, and the door was always open. For her to come back like this out of nowhere with lawyers and secrets. It's like a stranger has stolen our father's legacy and is holding it hostage, just to hurt us." She leaked rumors and half-truths, all twisted into a narrative that made me the villain. She claimed I had a history of being difficult and unstable. She hinted that I had manipulated our father in his final years, when he was sick and vulnerable after his stroke, somehow coercing him into creating this secret loophole. She described the scene in the hotel lobby with dramatic flair, portraying me as a cruel villain who had gleefully thrown her own family, including elderly relatives and small children, out on the street. The comments section was a predictable cesspool of outrage, a digital lynch mob baying for my blood. What a monster. I hope the family sues her for everything she has and more. Some people are just born without a soul. This is what happens when you abandon your family. My first instinct was to fight back, to scream, to write a long, furious post detailing every slight, every forgotten birthday, every unanswered phone call, to call the reporter and give him my side of the story. But as I sat there, my hands shaking with rage, my father's words echoed in my mind. The ocean doesn't fight the rocks. Fighting her in the mud of public opinion was her game. She thrived on loud public drama. Engaging would just be playing on her field, by her rules. Silence had always been my shield. Now I had to make it my sword. I called Savannah, my voice flat and cold. "Did you see it?" "I saw it," she said, her tone grim. "She's good. I'll give her that. She knows how to play the victim. The door was always open line is pure genius. What do I do, Savannah? This is my reputation. She's telling the whole world I'm a monster." "You do nothing," she said firmly, her voice snapping me back to focus. "You do not respond. You do not post a single thing. You do not talk to anyone. Let her scream into the void. Right now, she's controlling the story because it's the only one being told. We're going to give them a different one, but not in the court of public opinion. Not yet." Over the next few days, the pressure campaign escalated. Camille fed more stories to local bloggers. She started a GoFundMe page titled, "Help the Whitmores Reclaim Their Stolen Legacy." which was as brilliant as it was infuriating. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in 15 years started leaving me voicemails. They came in two flavors: the saccharine sweet pleas for reconciliation. Ava, honey, this isn't you. Please just talk to us. We love you. And the veiled, menacing threats. You have no idea the damage you're doing. You'd better fix this or you'll regret it. It was a full-scale emotional assault, a coordinated campaign designed to isolate me, shame me, and force me to surrender the house. But I held firm. I forwarded every voicemail and email to Savannah for documentation, and then blocked the numbers. I deleted my social media apps. I stopped looking at the news. I left the hotel suite and moved into the beach house. My house. I focused on what was real. I aired out the musty rooms. I scrubbed the dusty windows. I sat on the deck and read, the sound of the waves a calming antidote to their noise. The house became my fortress. Meanwhile, Savannah was building our arsenal. She had warned me this might happen, that Camille wouldn't just walk away defeated. While I had been cleaning, she had been digging. Okay, I've got a few things, she said when she called a week later, her voice humming with a focused energy. First, I pulled every text message and call record between you, Camille, and your mother for the past 10 years. It's a mountain of evidence. It paints a very clear picture of you reaching out and them ignoring you. The door was always open. Narrative is going to fall apart fast under cross-examination. Okay, I said, feeling the first spark of hope. Second, she continued, I tracked down Brenda, the head ICU nurse who took care of your dad. Remember her? She remembers you vividly. She also remembers your sister visiting for 5 minutes at a time to take a sad-looking selfie and then leaving. Her words, not mine. She thinks what Camille is doing is disgusting, and she's willing to sign a sworn affidavit about your devotion to your father's care. I swallowed hard, a lump forming in my throat. Wow, Sav. But this is the best part, Ava, Savannah said, her voice dropping with excitement. I had a thought. Your dad was a meticulous guy. He made that trust to protect you. What if he did more? You told me you found that old broken wind chime in a closet. What else might be in there? Go look. Look for anything that looks out of place. After we hung up, I went to the deep closet in my father's old bedroom. It was a time capsule, filled with his things. Boxes of old tax files, sweaters that still faintly smelled of his cologne, photo albums. I spent the entire afternoon on the floor, surrounded by dust and memories. In the very back, under a pile of old blankets, was a small, heavy metal lockbox. It was locked. I called a local locksmith. An hour later, he had picked the lock. The box creaked open. Inside, there wasn't much. Some old stock certificates, his military service medals, and 2 items that seemed out of place. A small unlabeled cassette tape and a black USB drive. It was like finding artifacts from 2 different centuries. I had to go to 3 different thrift stores before I found a dusty old Walkman that still worked. Back at the house, I sat on the floor, put on the headphones, and pressed play. After a moment of hiss, I heard his voice. It was younger, stronger. He was talking to his lawyer, decades ago, when they were drafting the trust. And then he said it. I want to put the provision in for Ava, just in case. Look, I love both my daughters, but they're different. Camille makes things loud. She likes the show, but Ava makes things last. She understands what this place is really about. It's not about parties on the deck. It's about quiet. It's about coming back to yourself. If anyone is going to preserve that, it's her. Tears rolled down my cheeks. He saw me. He knew even then. Then, with a trembling hand, I plugged the USB drive into my laptop. It contained a single video file, dated a few months after his stroke. I clicked on it. It was my dad sitting in his armchair at home. He was looking into the camera, his face thinner, his speech slurred, but his eyes were filled with a fierce, undeniable clarity. This is for Ava, he said. The words a struggle, but his intention clear as a bell. In case they don't listen. He took a shaky breath. This house is about memory. Camille, she forgets. Ava remembers. I want Ava to have this place. To keep it safe. It's not about fairness. It's about memory. He had left me the ammunition I needed. He had given me his voice. When Savannah saw the video and heard the tape, she was silent for a long moment. Well, she finally said, her voice cold and hard as steel. Camille brought this fight to the press. We're going to finish it in a court of law. The official-looking envelope that arrived a week later was no surprise. It was a petition filed in family court. My mother and Camille were formally suing me. The legal language was dense, but the accusation was simple. They were demanding the deed transfer be nullified on the grounds of undue influence and exploitation of a compromised legal document. Their argument, crafted by a high-priced lawyer, was that I, the long-estranged daughter, had no meaningful relationship with my father in his final years, and had used a dusty, forgotten technicality to seize an asset that rightfully belonged to the active, loving family unit. They were demanding the house be returned to the trust, under their full and exclusive control. The court date was set for a month later. The news of the lawsuit reignited the local media frenzy that Camille had so expertly orchestrated. She was on the offensive again, giving tearful interviews on the courthouse steps about her brave quest for justice for our father's true wishes. She painted a heartbreaking picture of a devoted daughter and a grieving widow just trying to protect their beloved patriarch's legacy from the predatory actions of a daughter who had abandoned him when he needed her most. Every article, every news segment was another twist of the knife, another public branding of me as the villain. My life became a strange, surreal bubble of quiet seclusion and intense legal strategy. I refused to be driven out of the beach house. It was my anchor in the storm. I spent my days walking on the cold winter sand and my nights on long, strategic phone calls with Savannah and her firm's lead litigator, a sharp, formidable woman named Mrs. Gable. She was in her 60s, with a reputation for being a calm, methodical shark in the courtroom. I sent them all the evidence, the mountain of unanswered texts, the unanswered call logs, the nurse's signed affidavit, the audio cassette, and the video. Mrs. Gable reviewed everything in silence. Our case is simple and strong. Ava, she finally explained over the phone, her voice a soothing balm of pure confidence. They are arguing about emotion, perception, and what they feel is fair. We will argue about facts, law, and intent. The trust is the law. Your father's intent, as captured on this tape and this video, is the central fact. We will not get drawn into a mudslinging match about who was a better daughter. We will present our evidence calmly and methodically in the courtroom, and we will win. Her confidence was a lifeline, but the days leading up to the court date were excruciating. My mother and Camille's public campaign had worked. I felt the weight of public opinion against me every time I went to the small-town grocery store. The whispers, the cold stares. I felt like I was on trial not just for buying a house, but for my entire life. For every time I had been quiet instead of loud. For every time I had retreated instead of fighting. In their narrative, my silence was proof of my estrangement and my guilt. In my reality, my silence was the scar tissue from 1,000 cuts they had inflicted over 30 years. The morning of the hearing, I woke up before dawn. The sky was a deep, starless indigo. I pulled on a sweatshirt and walked down to the beach, the sand cold and firm beneath my bare feet. The air was still, the ocean a calm, dark expanse. I held the small turquoise seashell my father had given me all those years ago, its smooth surface a familiar comfort in my palm. Think in tides. The tide was coming in, but it felt big and overwhelming, a tidal wave that threatened to pull me under. I took a deep, shuddering breath of the salt air. I had to see this through, not just for me, but for him. I chose my armor carefully, a simple, well-tailored navy blue dress. No flashy suit, no power play. I just wanted to look like myself, a calm, serious woman. Savannah met me at the courthouse, her presence a silent promise of support. She gave my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "You've got this," she said. "Just stay calm. Let Mrs. Gable do the talking. And if you have to speak, just tell the truth." It's all we need. The courtroom was small, modern and sterile, smelling faintly of lemon polish and anxiety. My mother and Camille were already there, sitting at the plaintiff's table with their slick, expensive-looking lawyer. They were both dressed in somber black, as if they were attending a funeral. Camille shot me a look of pure venom, her eyes cold and hard. My mother wouldn't look at me at all. She just stared straight ahead at the judge's bench, her face a pale, tight mask of strained righteousness. Their lawyer went first. His opening statement was a masterclass in theatrical sympathy. He painted me as the villain from a fairy tale, the wicked, estranged daughter who had appeared out of the shadows to snatch a precious heirloom. He used the words abandoned, opportunistic, and manipulative like weapons. He presented my 10-year absence from the family retreat as irrefutable proof that I had willingly and cruelly severed all family ties. He argued that my father, in his diminished state after the stroke, could not have possibly intended for an abandoned and forgotten clause in a 30-year-old trust to be used in such a predatory and heartless way. He was good. He made their story sound plausible, even tragic. As he spoke, Camille dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue. When it was Mrs. Gable's turn, her demeanor was the polar opposite. She was calm, factual, and surgically precise. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't resort to dramatics. She simply presented the facts. She began with the trust document itself, displaying the default clause on a large monitor for the judge to see. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and steady, "this is not a matter of feelings, but of contract law. The trust, signed by the deceased in sound mind and body, is a legal contract. The terms were clear. The trustees, my client's mother and sister, failed to meet those terms. The consequences for that failure, as dictated by the creator of the trust himself, were also clear. Then, she systematically dismantled their claim of estrangement. She presented the phone records, a decade of my one-sided attempts to connect. She showed the court copies of birthday cards and emails, all sent by me, all unanswered. This is not the behavior of a daughter who has severed ties, Your Honor," Mrs. Gable said calmly. "This is the behavior of a daughter who was consistently and systematically ignored." Next came the nurse's sworn affidavit, which she read aloud. The part about Camille's 5-minute selfie-driven hospital visits hung in the silent courtroom. I saw Camille flinch, a flash of red creeping up her neck. "And now, Your Honor," Mrs. Gable said, "we come to the most important piece of this case, Mr. Whitmore's intent." She introduced the audio cassette. The court clerk, a young man who looked barely out of his teens, fumbled for a moment to find a machine that could play it. Finally, my father's voice, strong and clear from decades past, filled the room. "Camille makes things loud. Ava makes things last." My mother closed her eyes. Camille stared at her hands, her knuckles white where she gripped her pen. Then came the voicemail. Mrs. Gable explained that a cousin, disgusted by the plaintiff's media campaign, had come forward with a message Camille had left her the previous year. She played it. Camille's own mocking, dismissive voice echoed in the courtroom. "Ava? God, no, she's not coming. Let her rot in her condo with her sad little life. She was never really part of this family anyway." A collective gasp went through the small public gallery. "And finally," Mrs. Gable said, her voice dropping slightly as she set up a laptop facing the judge, "I would like to play a short video. It was recorded by Mr. Whitmore a few months after his stroke. The very time period the plaintiffs claim he was being cruelly neglected by my client." She pressed play. My father's face, weaker, his speech slurred but his eyes filled with a fierce, unwavering light, appeared on the screen. He looked directly at the camera, as if he were looking directly at the judge. "This is for Ava, in case they don't listen. This house is about memory. It's not about fairness. It's about memory." The video ended. The courtroom was utterly, profoundly silent. Mrs. Gable sat down. She had said all she needed to say. The judge, a woman with tired, intelligent eyes, stared at the blank laptop screen for a long, contemplative moment. Then she looked at my mother and Camille. Her expression was unreadable, but her voice, when she spoke, was cold as iron. "I have reviewed the trust document," she said, her formal tone cutting through the silence. "And I have heard the testimony and reviewed the evidence presented today." She looked directly at me, then back at my mother. "A person's last will and testament, or in this case a trust, is not a suggestion. It is a directive. The evidence of the deceased's intent, both in the original, meticulously crafted document and in his own words, recorded years apart, is overwhelming and unequivocal." She looked at Camille, her eyes narrowing slightly. "It is also abundantly clear which party was truly estranged." She picked up her gavel. "The petition is denied. The transfer of the deed to Miss Ava Whitmore is legally sound and will stand. The trust is clear." The gavel came down with a sharp, final crack. It was over. The walk out of the courthouse was surreal. The world, which had felt gray and menacing that morning, was suddenly saturated with color. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. The sunlight felt warm on my skin. I took a breath, and for the first time in a month it didn't feel shallow and tight. It was a deep, clean breath of salt-tinged air, the air of freedom. Savannah hugged me hard, and even the formidable Mrs. Gable allowed a small, satisfied smile to grace her lips. I saw my mother and Camille rush out a side door, their heads down, their defeat a palpable cloak around their shoulders. I felt no triumph, no surge of victory, just a quiet, profound sense of release. The drive back to the beach house was a silent one. I didn't turn on the radio. I just listened to the sound of the tires on the pavement, watching the familiar landscape of dunes and seagrass roll by. When I pulled into the gravel driveway, I cut the engine and just sat for a moment, looking at the house. My house. Not provisionally, not contentiously, mine, undisputedly, legally, and now, finally, emotionally. When I walked through the door, the air inside felt different. It was as if the verdict had traveled ahead of me, sweeping out the stale energy of conflict and neglect. The house felt lighter, as if it had finally exhaled a breath it had been holding for years. It no longer felt like a stage for a family drama or a legal battleground. It felt like home. I didn't start cleaning or unpacking. Instead, I went to the hall closet where I had found the old seashell wind chime I'd made with my father when I was a child. I had left it on a shelf, still a tangled, chaotic mess of string and shells. I carried it out to the back deck, the one that overlooked the vast expanse of the Atlantic, and sat down in one of the old, weathered wooden chairs. I laid the knotted web in my lap. For years, my life had felt like this wind chime, a jumbled, tangled mess of confused feelings, of love and hurt, of belonging and exclusion, all knotted together so tightly I couldn't see where one began and the other ended. Slowly, patiently, I began to work on it. My fingers, surprisingly nimble, found the start of a knot. I traced the path of the string, loosening the tension, easing it apart. The first shell came free, a small, pearlescent oyster shell. I remembered the day we found it, my father telling me it looked like a smiling cloud. I worked for hours. The sun warmed my back. The rhythmic sound of the waves was a calming meditation. With each knot I undid, I felt a corresponding knot inside my own chest begin to loosen. I untangled the memory of the forgotten birthday, the pain of the cropped photograph, the sting of my mother's condescending words, the cold shock of the changed lock. I separated them, looked at them one by one in the clear light of day, and then I let them go, no longer tangled up with the good memories, the quiet walks with my dad, the smooth coolness of the turquoise shell. It was a slow, meticulous process of reclamation. By late afternoon, the wind chime was whole again. The strings hung straight and free, each shell finding its own space, its own place in the delicate balance of the whole. That evening, Savannah arrived. She didn't bring champagne or a celebratory cake. She brought a bottle of good red wine, 2 glasses, and a bucket of cleaning supplies. She didn't say anything about the court case, not a word. She just came and sat down next to me on the deck, handing me a glass of wine. "Needs a good scrub," she said, her eyes sweeping over the dusty windows and the salt-grimed railings. "I know," I said, with the first genuine, easy smile I'd had in weeks. We spent the entire next day cleaning. It was a baptism. We threw open all the windows, letting the fresh, clean salt air chase out the last vestiges of stale neglect. We put on old music and scrubbed the windows until they sparkled, until the brilliant blue of the ocean beyond seemed to pour into the rooms. We swept away years of dust and cobwebs from the corners. We polished the old wooden furniture until it gleamed, my father's favorite armchair, the big dining table where he'd taught me to play chess. We worked in a comfortable, easy rhythm, sometimes in a companionable silence, sometimes laughing as we recounted old stories from our friendship, stories that had nothing to do with my family. We were washing away more than just dirt. We were washing away the old story of sadness and abandonment, making space for a new one, as the sun began to set, casting a warm, golden glow over the sparkling, clean living room. I took the now untangled wind chime and a hammer and a nail. I stood on a chair on the front porch and hung it back on its hook by the door. Right where it used to be, right where it belonged. A gentle breeze came off the ocean, a soft evening sigh, and the shells began to dance. They kissed against each other, creating a soft, clinking music, a gentle, random melody that filled the evening air. It was the sound of something broken being made whole again. It was the sound of forgiveness. Not for them, but for myself. For all the years I had allowed their silence to define my own. It was the sound of peace. I sat on the porch steps with Savannah, sipping our wine, and listened to the music until the sky was filled with stars. I live in the beach house now. The quiet here is different from the silence I grew up with. It's not the heavy, suffocating silence of being ignored. It's a peaceful, chosen silence, filled with the sound of the waves and the gentle music of my father's wind chime. They said I left, that I drifted, that I chose to be estranged. But I didn't go anywhere. I was here the whole time, waiting to be seen. They just chose not to see me. They wrote me out of the family narrative, and when I refused to disappear, they tried to turn me into the villain. But the truth, like the tide, has a way of coming back in and washing away the lies written in the sand. There is no gloating in this new life, no satisfaction in their defeat. There is just this house, this view, and this silence now entirely on my terms. I untangled more than just a wind chime. I untangled myself. I found that the girl who was forgotten didn't need their memories to exist. She just needed to reclaim her own. If you've ever been written out of your own story, if you've ever been made to feel invisible by the people who were supposed to see you most clearly, you're not alone. Leave a word in the comments so silence doesn't win this time. Like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from.